This conference will now be recorded.
Was that
All
the
right,
brief?
Deane, it's all you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm not sure where you are, but I am in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and it's very cold here. We are at single-digit temperatures. We said goodbye to the ground a few weeks ago, and we probably will not see the ground again until March. So I hope it is warmer wherever you are, and I certainly hope you're gearing up for a happy holidays so far. What I'm here to talk to a bit today is book that I wrote over the summer accidentally. There's an interesting story behind it, but it's called Real World Content Modeling, and it's a field guide to CMS features and architecture. I wrote the book really accidentally. And if you follow me on Twitter, you probably saw me droning on and on about this blog post that had run wild. The genesis of the book came from a series of talks that I had given about distributed CMS and about headless CMS, and the fact that we have very little content interoperability because systems model content differently. Two systems may have wildly different ideas and notions of how content fits together. And I'll give you two examples for two different CMSs. You know, if you take something like an episerver, which has a very strong content tree where content's hierarchical, you have parent content and child content. And then take something like Drupal, which really is not that way at all. Drupal doesn't really have a built-in tree. You can add it with some modules, and you can sort of replicate it with menus, but the tree is not really the thing in Drupal. Drupal is really a typing system more than anything. And when you take those two systems, how do you get them to talk to each other? How do you get them to understand how each one models content? And I think that content modeling in CMS is a very, very deep topic. In the conclusion of the book, I talk about low context endeavors and high context endeavors. And the example I give for a low context endeavor is Diet Coke. Every can of Diet Coke tastes like every other can of Diet Coke, and Coca-Cola spends a lot of money to make sure that's the case. Whereas with content modeling, it is very, very high context. There's an enormous number of factors that play into how content is modeled, and small changes in the way a system models content can reverberate wildly throughout a system. So I had done a talk on headless CMS and done a talk on distributed CMS, and in both those talks I sort of lamented the idea that we just have wildly different notions of how to model content in different content management systems. And then roughly sometime just after that, Chris Sanders organized a content modeling conference call with I think 10 or 12 of us who had done quite a bit of work in the industry in this space. And we got a chance to talk for about an hour about challenges that we saw in the industry. And what I've always thought that when it comes to getting a group to kind of coalesce around an idea, it's really great to have something to argue about. I always maintain in the consulting world, nothing coalesces an opinion like a Word document. You can talk on conference calls till you're blue in the face, but get a Word document in front of somebody that makes a statement in words, and suddenly everybody will come up with objections they didn't have before, and you'll have a constructive argument about something. So after that phone call, I thought, well, I should write a blog post proposing some type of standard or way to qualitatively measure how a CMS models content. And so I set out to write a blog post, which is what I do a lot. And I started writing it, and it was one of those things that as I peeled off the layers and got deeper and deeper and deeper into it, there was so much more to write. I was to the point where I started to catalog my main thoughts in headings. So I was going to have a heading for this and a heading for this. And what I realized that I'd be writing something and thinking about some other aspect of content modeling. And so I would add a bunch of headings at the end of the document to catch up to later on. And it was to the point where my mind was way, way ahead of my fingers on the keyboard. And so I really got to the point where clearly this was too big to be a blog post. So then it morphed to the idea that it was going to be a section of the website. So instead of a post, it was going to be kind of a section. So I divided it up into multiple markdown files, and I put some kind of batch static publishing process on it. And it is actually published. It's actually open on the web somewhere in HTML. Obviously, I don't really advertise that because it's also available as a book, but I did publish it to a website. And and that worked out as well too. But then I got to the point where once I crossed over a certain word count, once I got past 20 or 25,000 words, I thought, you know what, we're really in book territory at this point. I did reach out to a few publishers, and they came back with what I expected they would say, is that it's such a specialized book. They couldn't quite figure out the target market that they would approach with it, and I kind of accepted that it probably was not a publishable book through a publisher. So what I was going to do was just publish it like as a PDF or something like that. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but then I was just finishing up my tenure at Blend Interactive, and we had a pitch coming up, and for that pitch, we wanted to have a slide demonstrating Blend Interactive's thought leadership, and I had written a book 3 years ago for O'Reilly, and then I'm writing another book now with Corey Vilhauer, who's content strategist, and so we had covers for those two books, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat if we had a third cover to represent this other body of work that I put together. So I went to my designer, incredibly gifted designer named Sam Otis. He's a digital designer, but he has a background in print, and he likes doing print work. And I went to Sam and I said, can we just throw together a quick book cover so I can put it on the slide so we can represent the fact that there are kind of three publishable bodies of work that we've done in this space, because we had this pitch we had to do for a university in New England. And Sam said, sure. And then the question came, well, what's the title? And I didn't really have a title. And so I threw together a title literally with very little thought. And then as a motif, I liked the phrase field guide. I always thought that phrase was kind of cool. And then I liked pith helmets. Pith helmets. If you're looking at the cover of the book on the GoToMeeting thing, the pith helmet is kind of the British helmet, that the helmet that the British soldiers wore in Africa was the pith helmet. And so I told that to Sam, and Sam is just shockingly gifted, and he came up with this. It took him a couple hours, apparently, threw this together. So he had a third cover to put on the slide, but then at some extent that coalesced to me that this was a legitimate book. So at the same time, I was in the process of coming to work at Episerver, where I work now. Episerver is a content management vendor, and I'm director of CMS strategy at Episerver. And I showed it to a couple of people at Episerver, and they said, we really do want to reemphasize content and CMS at our conference. And so this would be a good book to give away at the conference. So could you please get this into print so we could buy a bunch of copies and give it away at our conference? And so I was like, okay, wow, that's a lot. So I'm not going to say I rushed the book into print, but if you do have a copy of the book, if you look on the title page, it says a version 0.9 preview. We did get the book completed. I got it edited, and then we used Amazon Direct Publishing to publish the book, which was a remarkable process. The way the book, and I'm going to geek out a little bit on publishing pipelines, which I really enjoy, but the way the book is published is it's actually like 42 markdown files, and it's processed in Markdown and a templating language called Scribin. And then that is formatted purely with CSS. It uses the W3C paged media specification for CSS. The entire book, if you've ever looked through it, for all intents and purposes, it looks like a typeset paperback book. It's actually written in Markdown, transformed into HTML, and styled purely through CSS. And then there's a tool called Prints. Prints is a long-standing tool to convert styled HTML into PDF. And so I had this publishing pipeline where I would change something in Markdown and kick off this pipeline, which would process the Markdown, process the template, because there are some structures that aren't really Markdown friendly, like there's some structures for asides and things like that. And it would publish that and then turn it into a PDF. And then I had the cover and I had the PDF, and Amazon has this direct publishing builder system where you would upload your cover, and then it had like a designer you would use for the back cover. I wasn't in love with that. I don't think the back cover is very powerful at all, but I was
So,
limited to what to do.
Deane, can I pull you back if you don't mind?
Sure. No, hold on. I'm just about. I promise you, Giannis, I'm going back, but I just find. Let me geek out for like one more minute, and I'm coming back. I promise.
You got it. It's
Uh,
Christmas time.
no, I knew I was getting way off the reservation. I see. I get super excited about this. So anyway, we did get it out there, and they have an author copy thing, and Episerver was able to buy 500 copies of it. We shipped it to Episerver's Ascend conference, and it was given away. We gave away 500 copies, and like they all went out the door. I gave the opening keynote, and so thankfully that helped move some copies of the book. And they were giving the book away, and I managed to snag like 20 copies of it before they were gone and then ship them back to my office, so I did have them. But okay, so I'm done geeking out about how the book was actually produced, which from a content standpoint, I find absolutely, absolutely fascinating. But I was going to talk a little more about kind of the contents of the book. Giannis, if you want to tell me how you want to drag me back, I'm happy to go in that direction.
Yes, what's in the book?
Sure, sure. So what the book is it's a tool to evaluate how a system models content. And when I say evaluate how it models content, I mean content strategists tend to develop content models in a bubble and not by choice. They develop content models in a bubble because a lot of times a content strategist does not know what CMS their content's going to go into. Either the organization hasn't chosen a CMS, or they may be switching their CMS, or maybe they know what CMS they're going to use, but the content strategist has never worked with that CMS. We can't expect a content strategist to be an expert with every single content management system on the planet. So sometimes content strategists just don't know. And oftentimes we'll see content models developed that will compare them to the system. And when I say we, I mean my history and professional services. We'll compare them to the system they're supposed to go in, and nope, it's not going to go. That system cannot support that. Thankfully, content modeling is getting better, but especially if somebody has a legacy system they're using from some years ago, you sometimes have a real problem getting a content model designed by a strategist into a CMS. And I have a lot of experience with content modeling. It's like the thing that I have loved in this industry more than anything is the representation of some logical notion of content in a digital system. And so I set out to codify how I evaluate the modeling capabilities of a CMS. When I look at a new CMS, I'm a total CMS snob. And when I look at a CMS, I get all super snooty and judgmental about what it does and how it does things. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to write all that down. I'm going to write all the things down that I look for when I'm investigating or learning a new CMS. And that ended up as, I think, 27 different evaluation criteria for what you would look for in a content management system. And I start at the absolute very beginning. For instance, at the very beginning, can you even, or what is the built-in model? Because we look like something like Wikipedia, right? A wiki has a built-in content model. I mean, its model is a title and a body. That's it. That's its built-in content model. So the question was, what is the built-in model? So and if you look at like Drupal has a built-in model too. I mean, it has a title and it has a body, and then there's some other metadata around there. So every system at some level does have a built-in model, even if that model is just the name of a piece of content. And then, the next question is, can we extend that model with custom content types? Can it even be changed? Because there are some systems that this is the model and this is it and you can't change it. And so then we move in, if we can exchange it, if we can extend it, what attribute types? How can we add a date field? I mean, can we add a number field? Can we strongly type fields? And along the way of this process, I made some little timeouts about concepts about CMS architecture. Like, for instance, something as mundane as defining the difference between built-in and custom. When you look at a CMS, it has functionality that's built in, and then there's functionality that's custom. Well, where's that line? That line's different for every CMS, and what indicates whether something is built in or custom, and what's the fine line between configuration and custom code? When are you just configuring a CMS and when you're actually customizing it? And then we talk about software opinionation. There's some software that have an opinion of how it should be used, and a very strong opinion. And other software is kind of platformish, where it's wide open. But then we go down to, is content strongly typed when you're working at it with the API? How do we validate attributes? So if I've added a date field, can I specify that this date field has to be in a certain range? And then we get into aspects of editorial usability, editorial experience, which is something that people just don't talk about enough, which is, how does our CMS use the content model to make a good experience for the editors? Because happy editors make happy content. When we would have customers come to us when I worked in professional services and say we want a new CMS, the number one single biggest reason we would hear, single most frequent reason we would hear, is our editors hate it. And they hate it because the editorial experience was terrible. mean, it was just a monster to work with. And different content management systems can leverage the model to provide a much nicer editorial experience. And then we move out of what I would call discrete content modeling, which is modeling a single piece of content unto itself, and we get into aspects of relational content modeling. How can we relate content to each other? If we want this particular attribute to be a reference to another piece of content, can that be done? And what are all the different aspects of how that is done? And then we talk about custom things like, can we build custom validation rules? Can we bring custom attribute types? And then we move into even more advanced concepts like, can we repeat attribute values? Some systems like Drupal do that very well and very easily. Other systems, they have no notion of that. And then we talk about things like the maintenance of the model. When we have our content types, is every type discrete unto itself, or can we form types through object-oriented principles like inheritance or composition? And then we talk about trees. Can we put content into a tree? Can we inherit content objects from each other? And then later on, we get into some really fun conversations, I think, too, about the page model. When we're talking about web content management system, the content model and the page model can sometimes be two separate things. The idea of a content model existing somewhere and that content model being accessible at a URL are two different things. And what does that translation look like? When a request comes in for a particular URL, how do we actually match that up to a piece of content? And we move into aspects of how we're structuring rich text, because this is changing quite a bit now. WordPress just released their Gutenberg interface. Magnolia has their stories interface. Systems are now doing page building by stacking discrete elements on top of each other. And then there's page composition. Can you do drag and drop composition to create a page? And if you can do that, how does that impact your content model? If you can do drag and drop page composition, you might not need a lot of content types that you used to need. We talk about aggregation structures. If we want to do large scale organization of content objects, like into a taxonomy or into categories or into menus or lists or collections, what features do we have for that? And then I think we move at the tail end to talk about like meta modeling issues. For instance, how is the model actually defined? Some systems like Drupal, for instance, are point and click, and Episerver used to be point and click. And so you would add attributes to types through the interface, but now we're morphing into a world where models are created through code. So we have some underlying code representation that we deploy, and then that kind of bootstraps the model in the production environment. Talk about how do we change the model afterwards? What aspects do we run into when we have to change a model, add a type or drop a type or something like that? And then finally, what API support do we get for the model? Because shortcomings in a content model can be worked around quite a bit through the API. In the book, I call it model hacking. So you can hack your content model to overcome shortcomings as long as you have a reasonably competent API. And the competence of the API gives you a really tool set to get around some things that your content model doesn't do. So that's where I kind of ended up with it. It ended up being 47,000 words. The book is about 200 pages. It's a 6x9 trade paperback. I am going to release a new version very quick. There's some corrections. A few people wrote me with some typos and errors that I need to get corrected. And then I did have just a couple other small changes I want to make. So I am going to upload a new version. And right now, and I apologize to everybody, there is not an ebook right now, because I've learned through this process that ebooks are a little bit different than print books in terms of you can have hyperlinks and things like that. And so I just need to take a day and get the ebook version out. So right now it's literally only available in paperback. And I published it through Amazon. So it is only available from Amazon. And Giannis, I hope I came back to where you wanted me to go, and I think that's all I had to say.
I think that's great. Thank you very much, Deane. We still have some time left. Let's open it up for questions and answers. As usual on these calls, there might be a second or two delays as people go and unmute. But who wants to go first? So, any takers? I can ask the first one. While people get ready, you can also use the chat. I think Evo just asked on the chat, our creation member, if you see any differences in content model features between headless and traditional.
Yes and no. I mean, no, in the sense there really shouldn't be. I mean, content is content. The only real difference is that a web CMS is going to have some page model that's going to impact the content model. There's going to be some translation layer between an inbound request to a web server and how that gets converted into a page of content. For instance, a headless CMS, you probably won't, I want to say you wouldn't ever see a headless CMS with a page composition system where you're composing pages, but there actually is one, weirdly. Amplience allows you to do some landing page composition, which I'm still trying to figure out how that fits into anything. But I would hope not. I would hope the difference would be the same. What I am seeing is in the headless space is just that market is still a little bit immature. They're, the kind of longest standing headless CMS has been around for what, 5 years? And so they are still trying to solve some of the modeling problems that the traditional CMS market has been solving for 10, 12 years now. So they still need to mature a little bit in the modeling space. But I mean, the biggest difference is just going to be how an inbound web request is translated into a request to CMS.
All right, very good. Any other questions? Feel free to ask or write on the chat like Evo did from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. All right, the question I had, Deane, was I think it's always a privilege to have this time, even if not in person, just over a call with the author of the book. Can you just share a little bit on what any eye-opening things to you along the journey, highlighting perhaps one or two things that surprised you as you were peeling the onion, as you said?
It just surprised me how, of course, it surprises you when you start writing something down that you've been doing for a long time. Surprises you how much there is to write down, right? How much we just kind of absorb as people who work in this space, because I mean, people on this call work in content. We're content strategists, we're content vendors. It's amazing if you actually go back to the beginning and you unwind something like content modeling. It's amazing the depth of tacit knowledge that I had in my head and that most of the people on this call probably have in your heads. So just understand when you're explaining content modeling to somebody, the depth of knowledge you're probably sitting on that you don't even think about is remarkable. And I think if you do get a chance to read the book, that first chapter is what is the built-in content model. You might read that and think, well, this is ridiculous. Of course, this is something that we all know. Well, no, we don't all know it. You may think we all know it because we work in the space, but I promise you there are a lot of people who don't in fact know it. So just don't overlook the fact that we probably all possess a shocking amount of knowledge that other people don't have.
And then we had a question on the chat, and I think perhaps Laura Stringer already answered it. Does the book cover how to tackle content modeling in terms of collaboration, so that it's not just a one-sided approach, not only developers or content strategists working alone in isolation?
So,
and Laura put down 1218.
I don't know if those are chapters, Laura. Boy, you've read it more closely than I have.
You can go ahead and ignore that.
Okay, all right. I'm like, that's a reference. It's coded messages.
So it does not cover that. Here's the thing about this book. What I want to stress about this book is that this is not a process book. This isn't about the value of a content model, and this isn't about how to create a content model. This is about how content models are supported by content management systems. If you want to know how the process of actually creating a content model, the book you want is Designing Connected Content by Carrie Hain and Mike Atherton, I think. That's the book you want. In fact, I think I had that in a footnote to my book. But the book is not about the process of designing content. Also, I'm not trying to convince you in the book that a content model is the thing you need to have. I assume that you realize this when you pick up the book. The book is literally about how content models are supported by content management systems and how to evaluate the content modeling features of a content management system.
Very good. So we had another question from Paris, and that's how does the book cover how content management systems deploy content model changes?
So that's changed recently. I would say in the last few years, it's become much more mainstream to deploy them as code artifacts. It used to be that, so let's say we want to make a content change. In fact, the example I give in the book is we have an article content type and we want to add the mood. We want to add a field that we can record the mood we were in when we wrote this piece of content. So we're like, okay, we're going to add this mood. So we go into our development system and we click through an interface and we add it there. And then we make all of our other changes, because the important thing when you make a content model change, it's rarely made in isolation. Content model changes are usually always made in partnership with some other change. You usually always have a templating change of some kind or a workflow change. Very rarely, why would you just add an attribute to store a new piece of content and then never do anything else with that piece of content, right? So if we wanted to add the mood to our article, we would kind of add this to an interface, and then we'd make our code changes. And then we would have to figure out how we're going to get those both running in production at the same time, and if one change is going to break without the other change, because now we have changes made in the interface that are recorded in the database of the CMS, and we have changes that are made to code artifacts that need to be deployed. And so what we might do is make in this particular case, we would then duplicate that model change in the production environment because it's harmless in and of itself, and then deploy the code, which kind of activates that model change. And that's how things used to be done. And obviously, as I'm explaining, there's a whole bunch of shortcomings to that. What we're seeing more and more now is content models being defined in code. They're being defined as code files, either like in a lot of .NET systems, they're defined as actual C# object files. And they're deployed. And so when they're deployed and the production system is restarted, the model is kind of bootstrapped at that time, which is a much more manageable system. Now, the problem with that system is that you need developers to make model changes. I've actually done a whole lot of writing on that as well. So if you think, well, I want to make model changes without developers, then that needs to play into your CMS decision, because some systems can do that and some systems cannot. So.
All right. And a question from Leipzig, Germany, asking if there's any way to buy the book anywhere else but Amazon.
Unfortunately, there is not. It was published through Amazon Direct Publishing. Eventually, I assume there'll be some used copies floating around. But
Yeah.
At the moment, no, it's Amazon or nothing.
That's the way it works. Any other closing comments from your side, Deane? We have another minute or two to wrap things up. Anything that you feel that we missed, or a closing remark as we look at content models for 2020?
Nothing about the book, but I will just throw in a plug for your conference in Brooklyn in May. I'm excited to come talk there. I'll just say that if you want to come to Giannis's Brooklyn conference, I am going to be giving a talk based entirely around a sketch from Saturday Night Live, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. So I hope you can come to that.
Thank you very much, Deane. Really looking forward to seeing you in Brooklyn. I will share the Saturday Night Live sketch, if that's okay with you, Deane.
No. Don't.
It's a very famous sketch.
Sketch
All right, I won't.
No,
I can't tell them what the sketch is.
You have to come to the conference.
All right.
Sketch.
Yes, be there in person. We are not going to do a recording of that. But for now, on content models, thank you very much, Deane, for sharing not just the table of contents of the book, but your insights, the changes, your marketplace experience. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who found the time to join our final call of 2019. All the best. Happy holidays. And as usual, I'll share the notes, and then we'll hopefully meet again in 2020. All the best. Thank you, Deane.
Thank you, everybody.